My name is Claire Morrison. I was 29 years old the day I passed the bar exam, and my mother chose my brother's car dealership expansion party over my admission ceremony. I remember standing on the steps of the county courthouse in Charlotte, North Carolina, in my gray blazer and the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me, holding my phone so tightly the case left grooves in my palm. Around me, other newly sworn-in attorneys were being swept into embraces, bouquets shoved into their arms, champagne being cracked open on the courthouse steps by people who couldn't wait until they got to the restaurant. I had saved 2 seats at dinner. I had told my mother the date 4 times, twice by phone and twice by text. The message read, "We're at Marcus's signing. He got the 3rd location. Can you believe it? 3 dealerships. We're all here. So proud of our boy. Watch the live stream, honey. They're doing a cake." I read it twice. Then I looked up at the courthouse dome against the October sky and thought, of course. Before I tell you what happened next, and how the same family that once called me dramatic for caring about my career eventually watched that career dismantle everything they had built, tell me something. What time is it where you are right now? And have you ever worked for years toward a single moment, only to realize the people you wanted in the front row were never going to show up? I want to know how many of you are listening to this at midnight, because you understand exactly what I'm describing. If you grew up the quiet, responsible kid in a family that worshipped someone louder, you already know the specific weight of what I'm about to say. You know the particular exhaustion of being the one who never needed help, so no one ever offered any. You know what it feels like to be praised in theory and invisible in practice. My brother Marcus is 4 years older than me and has the kind of personality that fills a room the way smoke fills a room, thick, everywhere at once, hard to see through. Growing up in our house in Greensboro, he was the story my parents told at every dinner party. Marcus sold his first car at 19. Marcus charmed the bank into his first loan at 22. Marcus, Marcus, Marcus. My mother kept a framed photo of him shaking hands with a local news anchor on the mantle in the living room. It was there from the time I was in college, until the day she had to sell the house. I brought home honor roll certificates, then merit scholarships, then a full ride to law school. My father's standard response was some variation of, "That's great, sweetheart, have you talked to your brother lately?" He could use someone sharp on the legal side when he expands. I was not a person with a future in their eyes. I was a resource in orbit around Marcus, waiting to be useful to him. I applied to the state attorney general's office during my 2nd year of law school, the Consumer Protection Division. I had written my Note Law Review article on predatory auto lending practices and elder financial exploitation, and the division chief had emailed me personally after reading it. That email meant more to me than any grade I had ever received. I printed it and kept it in my desk drawer. My mother's reaction when I told her about the job offer. "Oh, government work. Well, it's stable, I guess. Your brother was wondering if you'd considered coming home. He really needs someone who understands contracts." I took the job in Raleigh. I moved in August, boxes in a rented pickup, nobody to help me carry anything up the stairs. I called my mother from the floor of my empty apartment that first night, and she spent 20 minutes telling me about Marcus's new marketing campaign before asking where I was living. But that was before the courthouse steps, before the party I wasn't invited to. Before I opened a complaint file on a Tuesday morning in late November and felt the floor shift underneath me. The job was exactly what I had imagined it would be, which is rare and worth saying. I spent my days reading consumer complaints, building case timelines, coordinating with investigators, and occasionally sitting across a conference table from attorneys representing companies that had spent years believing they were too small to get caught. There is a specific satisfaction in that work I have never been able to fully explain to anyone who hasn't done it. You are not winning anything glamorous, you are just making sure the math eventually adds up. I had been in Raleigh 8 months when a complaint landed on my desk that a senior investigator had flagged for auto sales fraud. A cluster of cases, all originating from dealerships in the Piedmont Corridor odometer rollbacks, forged vehicle history reports, misleading financing terms buried in the fine print, a pattern of targeting first-time buyers and elderly customers who didn't know what they were signing. The investigator had pulled business registration records. He had highlighted a name, Morrison Auto Group. I remember the exact feeling. It was not dramatic. It was not a gasp. It was more like the moment when you are reading, and a word goes blurry, and you realize you have been staring at it without seeing it. I blinked. I looked at the address. I looked at the registered owner. I put the file face down on my desk and walked to the bathroom and stood over the sink with cold water running over my wrists for about 2 minutes. Marcus had 3 dealerships now. I knew that. I had gotten the text about the 3rd location. What I had not known, had not let myself think about, was whether the tactics that had made him successful were the kind of tactics I spent my working days documenting and prosecuting. I went back to my desk. I picked up the file. I read every page. By the time I finished, I had a sick, certain feeling that had nothing to do with the 3 cups of coffee I had consumed before 10 in the morning. The complaint pattern was specific and consistent. An 81-year-old woman in Alamance County, who had gone in to buy a sensible sedan for her fixed income and left with a subprime loan on a vehicle whose true mileage was 40,000 miles higher than the odometer, showed. A 23-year-old single mother in Davidson County, whose car had broken down 4 months after purchase, and whose dealer arranged financing had an interest rate that was not disclosed correctly on the paperwork she had signed. 14 complaints total. 14 people who had trusted a business with a friendly name and a family story on its website. I went home that night and opened my laptop and pulled up Morrison Auto Group's website. There was Marcus, front and center, in a photo that looked like it had been taken by a professional photographer. Big smile, hands on his hips. 3 generations of honest dealing, the banner read. I sat with that for a long time. Here is the part of this kind of story that nobody wants to talk about. The part between knowing and doing something about what you know. Because it is not simple, and anyone who tells you it is simple has never been there. There is the version of you that is a professional, trained to act on documented evidence, with legal obligations you understood when you took the job. And there is the version of you that is still a kid in a house in Greensboro, and that version is standing at the bottom of a very long staircase, calculating what it will cost to climb it. I spent a week not sleeping well. I told myself I was gathering more information. I pulled public records, cross-referenced complaint addresses against dealership locations, requested financing documents through a third party to preserve process integrity. I was being thorough, I told myself. I was not stalling, except I was absolutely stalling. The thing that ended the stalling was a phone call. A woman named Patricia called our complaint line on a Thursday afternoon. She was 74. She had been a school librarian for 31 years. She had saved carefully her entire working life and had a specific amount set aside to buy a reliable used car and take care of herself without asking her children for help. She had walked into a Morrison Auto Group location 6 months earlier because her granddaughter had bought a car there and liked the staff. She had left with a vehicle that broke down on the highway 3 weeks later, with loan paperwork that had been altered after she initialed it, and with a financing rate that was going to cost her more in interest than the car was worth. She was not calling to be dramatic. She was calling because she wanted to understand what had happened to her. She said, "I just want to know if I did something wrong." I processed that intake form, and then I went into the bathroom again. But this time, I was not running cold water over my wrists. I was making a decision. I walked into my supervisor's office and closed the door behind me. She looked up from her monitor. "I have a conflict of interest to disclose on the Morrison Auto Group complaint cluster," I said. My hands were steadier than I expected. She leaned back. "Tell me." "The registered owner is my brother," I said. "I have not discussed this case with him or with anyone in my family. I have not shared any information with him. I am disclosing now, because the evidence warrants escalation, and I cannot be the one to escalate it." She was quiet for a moment. "Does he know you work here?" "Yes," I said. "He just doesn't think it applies to him." She asked me a version of the question. My old supervisor from the video I'm drawing this story from would recognize. "Do you want to warn him?" I thought about Patricia. I thought about the 14 complaints. I thought about Marcus's photo on the website, the professional smile, the 3 generations of honest dealing banner. I thought about every birthday dinner where my parents asked me when I was going to stop with the government work and come help my brother with the legal side, and what it would have meant if I had. I want him to be accountable, I said. But I'll give him a chance to hear it from me before the formal process moves. That's all I can give him. I called Marcus that night. He answered on the first ring, which surprised me. And his voice was easy and warm in that particular way. It always is when he has not yet realized the conversation is not going to go the way he wants. "Hey, counselor," he laughed. "Long time." I did not do small talk. I told him what I needed to tell him in the clearest possible terms I could manage. That I worked in the Consumer Protection Division. That complaints had been filed against his dealerships. That I had read them. That the documentation was serious. That I was recused from the case, but that the case was real and moving forward. That he needed a lawyer who was not related to him. That if he cooperated and self-reported certain practices, the outcome would be different than if he made the state investigate him piece by piece. There was a long silence. Then, "You're joking." "I'm not. You're threatening me." "I'm warning you," I said. "There's a difference, and you should learn it before you talk to the investigators." His voice changed. Got flatter, colder, the way it used to when we were kids, and I had said something he didn't know how to respond to. "You always had a problem with me, didn't you? Couldn't just be happy for once. Couldn't just let me do my thing." "Marcus," I said. "An elderly woman lost part of her retirement savings because of paperwork that was altered after she signed it. This is not about me and you." He hung up. I was not surprised. What surprised me was the call I got 12 minutes later from my mother. She did not say hello. She said, "Claire, what did you say to your brother?" I told her what I had told him, in the same words, as calmly as I could manage. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that I have thought about many times since. She said, "You know what your problem is? You have always been jealous of how hard your brother worked." I had passed the bar exam. I had a job title that required a law degree and years of specialized experience. I had never once asked my family for money, or help, or a single thing. And my mother, in the year of our Lord 2023, told me my problem was jealousy of a man whose dealership had 14 pending consumer fraud complaints. I said, "Mom, I need you to hear me. People are going to get hurt if this doesn't stop." She said, "People are going to get hurt if you don't stay in your lane." She hung up. My father texted me 20 minutes later. 4 words. "Don't do this, Claire." I did not respond to either of them. I did what I had been trained to do. I documented my disclosure, filed the recusal paperwork, and handed my materials to the lead investigator. I told him everything I had found, and then I stepped back and let the process work. I want to be honest about the months that followed, because I think stories like this one sometimes skip over the ugly parts and jump to the cathartic ending, and the ugly parts are where most of us actually live. The investigation was real and thorough and slow. Investigators visited dealerships. They subpoenaed financing records. They interviewed employees, some of whom, as it turned out, had been uncomfortable with certain directives for years and had never had anyone official ask them to describe those directives out loud. The evidence was not ambiguous. The odometer discrepancies were documented in dozens of vehicles. The altered paperwork was not an isolated incident. The financing practices had a specific pattern that pointed upward, not to individual salespeople acting alone. During those months, I did not hear from my brother. I heard from my mother twice. Once to tell me that Marcus had hired an attorney, and that I had destroyed the family, and that she hoped I understood what I had done. Once to tell me that my father had been taken to the emergency room for chest pain, which turned out to be severe anxiety and not a cardiac event, but which she presented to me as evidence of what I had caused. I sat with both of those calls for a long time. I want to be honest about that too. I did not feel like a hero. I felt like someone who had been carrying a weight for a long time and had finally set it down, and the setting down had hurt other people, and knowing the weight was real and needed to be set down did not make that part feel clean. Grief and rightness can coexist. That is something nobody prepares you for. What I held on to, through all of it, was Patricia's voice on the complaint line. "I just want to know if I did something wrong." She had not done anything wrong. That sentence was my North Star every time the ceiling felt like it was coming down. The state moved in the spring. A formal consent order, public record. 3 Morrison Auto Group dealerships, ordered to cease deceptive practices, submit to oversight, provide restitution to identified complainants, civil penalties that had commas in them. Several counts referred to the district attorney's office, which was its own separate process. My brother's name was in the news in a way that had nothing to do with his marketing campaign or his expansion party. He gave a statement through his attorney. He called the investigation politically motivated. He called the complainants exaggerations. He said his family had built their reputation on trust. I read the statement at my kitchen table at 7 in the morning and thought about the framed photo of him on my parents' mantel and about all the rooms I had refilled with water glasses so he could keep talking. The fallout was exactly as bad as a fallout like that is. The 3rd dealership location, the one the expansion party had celebrated, had to be shut down within 6 months. The financing company that had partnered with him severed the relationship. His face came off the billboard on Interstate 85. His attorney fees were, by any reckoning I could estimate, extraordinary. My parents sold the house in Greensboro, not because they had to, but because maintaining it while supporting my brother's legal expenses required liquidity they had not expected to need. My mother moved into a smaller place. My father stopped going to the Chamber of Commerce events, where he had spent years introducing himself as Marcus Morrison's father. Here is the part I said I would be honest about. I did not stand in a parking lot and watch any of this happen. I did not need to. I had done my part when I walked into my supervisor's office. Everything after that belonged to the process I had trusted. What I did not expect was the whistleblower provision. Because I had documented my conflict of interest disclosure carefully, and because the case had relied in part on the complaint data I had processed before recusing, and because the AG's office had pursued civil penalties in a case that was directly connected to my early-stage analysis, the law that governs that kind of thing said I was eligible for a portion of the collected penalties. I will not tell you the specific number because it is not the point of the story, but I will tell you that it was more money than I had ever seen in an account with my name on it. It arrived as a legal disbursement in the fall, about 14 months after I had first turned that file face down on my desk. I sat with it for 3 weeks. I thought about what someone who had spent her career in consumer protection law and had access to resources she had never had before should do with money that had come from holding a predatory business accountable. The answer, when I stopped overthinking it, was obvious. I registered a nonprofit. I named it the First Signature Project. The idea was simple and specific. Free legal services and financial counseling for elderly and first-time auto buyers in North Carolina who had signed contracts they did not fully understand and who could not afford private legal help to unwind them. We partnered with 2 law school clinics and a community bank that offered low-rate emergency auto loans to people trying to exit bad contracts. We ran workshops. We trained volunteers. We showed up at senior centers with plain English guides to reading financing paperwork. The irony was not subtle. The funds that Marcus's dealerships had generated through the practices they had normalized were now being used to protect exactly the people those practices had exploited. I did not take pleasure in naming it that way. I just thought it was the most useful thing those particular dollars could do. My mother called in late autumn. I answered. She did not apologize. I want to be clear about that, because I think it matters. What she did was something more complicated. She said things were hard. She said my brother was not doing well. She said the legal process had taken everything they had built and that she did not know how to make sense of what had happened to her family. She said, and this is the part I keep coming back to, I don't understand how you could watch this happen to us. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, Mom, I didn't watch it happen. I watched it start, and I tried to stop it, and no one would listen. Another silence. She said, you could have handled it differently. Maybe, I said. But the 14 people who filed complaints didn't have the option to handle it differently. They just got hurt. She said, we're still your family. I know, I said. I love you. That's true at the same time as everything else being true. I am open to a real conversation whenever you're ready to have one. But a real conversation means we talk about what happened, not around it. She did not say anything after that. We sat on the line for a moment, and then she said she had to go, and I said okay, and we hung up. I did not cry. I sat on my couch for a while and thought about Patricia, and about the framed photo on the mantel, and about the pearl earrings I had worn on the courthouse steps, and about how different things feel when you stop waiting for someone else to confirm you were worth celebrating. My father sent a card at Christmas. No letter inside, just a card, signed with both their names in his handwriting. On the front was a winter landscape. I put it on my refrigerator because I thought that was the honest thing to do, not to frame it as more than it was, and not to throw it away, either. It was a card. It was something. I was not going to pretend it was everything. Here is what I want to say to you. If you are the person listening to this who has been told, in 100 quiet ways, that your accomplishments are nice, but they are not the main event. If you are the person who has watched a sibling receive celebration that your milestones never got, not because your milestones were smaller, but because the people keeping score were keeping a different kind of score. If you are the person who has been asked, directly or indirectly, to make yourself smaller so someone else could look bigger. I did not become a lawyer because my family believed in me. I became a lawyer because I believed in something, and that something turned out to be more durable than their approval. The work I did, the cases I built, the 14 complaints I read on a Tuesday morning that changed the direction of my professional life. None of that happened because my parents showed up for my admission ceremony. It happened because I kept going anyway. Blood does not give anyone the right to harm people and ask you to look away. Family is not a reason to watch someone get hurt in silence. Loyalty that asks you to protect a lie is not loyalty. It is complicity dressed up in a word that sounds warmer than it is. The most painful thing I had to learn, in all of this, was that my brother's business practices and my family's choices were not a reflection of my worth. I spent years as a child translating their inattention as a fact about me that I was less interesting, less valuable, less worth showing up for. It took standing in my professional capacity, with documentation, and watching them dismiss that too, for me to finally understand that the problem had never been me. The problem was a story they had decided to tell. And in that story, I was not a main character. I could spend the rest of my life trying to rewrite myself into their version, or I could write my own. I chose my own. The First Signature Project has helped more than 200 families in its first year. Some of them have gotten out of contracts that were going to cost them tens of thousands of dollars. Some of them have simply learned to read paperwork before they sign it, which sounds small until it is not small. I get emails sometimes from people I have never met who say that a volunteer at one of our workshops saved them from making a decision they could not have recovered from. I print some of those emails. I keep them in a drawer. I do not have a framed photo on anyone's mantle. I am not the center of any party. But I am 30 years old, and I have done something real. And I know what my name means, and nobody gave it to me. So if you're listening tonight, and you have been waiting for someone in your family to finally see you, stop waiting. Not because they don't matter. They might matter enormously. But your life does not pause while you wait. The work you are capable of does not wait. The people you could help do not wait. You are allowed to do excellent things without an audience that loves you. You are allowed to stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided how to interpret you. You are allowed to succeed loudly, in a direction that has nothing to do with who they wanted you to be. And if your success ever shines a light into a corner that someone in your family was hoping to keep dark, that is not your fault. You did not build the corner, you just refused to stand in it anymore. If you were in my position, would you have made the same call? Would you have walked into that office and filed that disclosure, knowing what it would cost? Leave me your answer in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this story sounds familiar, if you have been the quiet one in a family that made noise about someone else, I want to hear that too. My name is Claire Morrison. I am a consumer protection attorney. I am the founder of the First Signature Project. And for the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am introducing when I say my name.